He walked in like any other customer. No reservation, no designer suit. Just a quiet guy looking for dinner. But what the waitress did next? Insulted him, embarrassed him, kicked him out. What she didn't know was that he owned the entire restaurant. This isn't just a story. It's a lesson the internet will never forget. It was a cool Friday evening in the heart of the city, the kind of night when people put on their best outfits, book tables in advance, and treat themselves to fine wine and gourmet meals. The restaurant, Maison de Luxe, was alive with energy. Chandeliers glimmered from the ceiling, glasses clinked in harmony, and the air smelled of truffle oil, seared steak, and freshly baked sourdough. Every table was full. Waiters in crisp white shirts zipped around the room like bees in a hive, perfectly choreographed as they balanced trays of entrees, scribbled orders, and kept water glasses filled to the brim. Laughter floated from the private booths, and the hum of polite conversation was broken only by the occasional pop of a champagne cork. At the center of it all sat the VIP section, roped off, plush, with velvet chairs and a view of the entire dining floor. Only celebrities, high-end clients, or close friends of the owner ever sat there. And on this particular evening, that section was empty, waiting for someone special. Then he walked in. The door opened, and heads turned as a man stepped inside. No announcement, no spotlight, just pure presence. He was massive, easily 6 feet 9 inches with shoulders that seemed to block the doorway. He wore a simple maroon t-shirt stretched across his broad chest, paired with dark jeans and sneakers that looked custom-sized. No jewelry, no designer labels, no entourage, just confidence and calm. The hostess, a young woman named Maya, looked up and paused mid-sentence as she greeted another party. Her eyes widened for a second, but then she composed herself. The man gave her a soft nod and a smile. "Evening," he said. "Welcome," she replied, almost too stunned to speak. "Do you have a reservation?" "Nope," he said, just hoping for a quiet meal. She glanced at the screen. Fully booked, but something told her not to say no. "That booth in the corner is open," she said, motioning to the VIP section. "Feel free to sit there." He nodded again, gave a quick thank you, and made his way through the restaurant. As he walked, conversations slowed. Forks paused mid-air. Some diners leaned toward each other, whispering, Is that Big Shaq?" Others just stared in awe, trying to place his face. He looked like someone you'd see in a basketball arena or on a magazine cover. A few even pulled out their phones, pretending to check messages while sneakily snapping photos. But the man paid no mind. He didn't walk like someone who needed attention. No swagger, no arrogance, just quiet dignity. He made his way to the empty booth in the VIP section and gently lowered himself into the seat. The chair creaked under his size, but he adjusted politely, careful not to disturb anyone. He scanned the menu briefly, then set it aside. It wasn't about the food for him. He just wanted peace, a break from the chaos of the world outside. What he didn't realize, or perhaps did, was that his very presence had already disrupted the routine. And then, the problem started. From across the room, a waitress named Chloe spotted him sitting in the VIP section. Chloe had worked at Maison de Luxe for over 5 years. She was known for her speed, her sharp memory, and her equally sharp attitude. She was also fiercely protective of the VIP area, a space she believed should only be used by the elite. She narrowed her eyes, scanned him up and down, and frowned. No suit, no tie, no reservation. That wasn't someone she'd seen before, and certainly not someone she recognized from their usual high-profile clientele. Without waiting or asking anyone, she grabbed her notepad and stormed across the floor, weaving between tables with practiced speed. Several guests turned to watch. They could feel tension building. She arrived at the booth, planted herself squarely beside the massive man, and said loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear, "Excuse me, sir. That seat is reserved. You can't just walk in and sit here." The man looked up at her calmly. His expression didn't change. No anger, no surprise, just disappointment. "I was told it was available," he said gently. "Well, it's not. This section is for VIPs only," she said, arms crossed. "And you clearly don't belong here." Gasps echoed from the nearby diners. People exchanged wide-eyed glances, but the man didn't respond. He just sat there, silent. And in that moment, as the room went quiet, the story truly began. Chloe, a seasoned server at Maison Deluxe, had worked the dining floor for over a decade. She was confident, quick-witted, and fiercely proud of her role, especially when it came to guarding the sanctity of the VIP section. She knew the faces of every celebrity, socialite, and billionaire who frequented those velvet booths. To her, the VIP area wasn't just reserved seating, it was sacred ground. So when she looked across the restaurant and saw a man, dressed casually in a maroon t-shirt and jeans, making himself comfortable in the VIP section, her eyes narrowed instantly. Her mind kicked into gear. Who is this guy? No reservation, no suit, no entourage. He definitely didn't look like one of the regulars. Chloe didn't wait for permission. She didn't ask the hostess. She didn't even check the system. She just stormed across the dining room, her black apron swaying with every determined step. Tables went quiet as she passed. Guests sensed something brewing. A few curious diners tilted their heads. Some lifted their wine glasses halfway, and others began pulling out phones under the table. Conflict was rare at this level of dining, and when it happened, it was theater. Chloe arrived at the booth and planted herself in front of the man like a bouncer at a nightclub. "Excuse me, sir," she said sharply, hands planted firmly on her hips. "That seat is reserved. You can't just walk in and sit there." The man looked up slowly. His eyes were calm, not confused, not scared, just calm. He gave a polite, almost apologetic smile and replied gently, "I just wanted a quiet place to enjoy a meal." His voice was deep, warm, and soft-spoken, the kind of voice that could calm a room if people were willing to listen. But Chloe wasn't in the mood to listen. She scanned his outfit again. No expensive watch, no designer jacket, no sign that he was a high roller, just a regular guy. Or so she thought. "No offense," she said, her tone now laced with sarcasm, "but this section is for real guests, people who belong here, not tourists." A nearby couple winced at her words. A man at the next table whispered to his wife, "Is she serious right now?" Chloe noticed the attention but doubled down. "You'll need to move, now." The tension in the air thickened. It was like time slowed down for a moment. The servers froze. The bartender peeked around the corner. Even the piano player stopped mid-note. And through it all, Big Shaq stayed still. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get angry. He didn't try to explain. Instead, he stood up, slowly, like a mountain rising from the earth. He looked Chloe in the eye and said, "Okay, if that's how you feel." That one sentence, delivered without an ounce of malice, hit the room harder than any shouted insult could have. He wasn't backing down out of fear. He was stepping away out of principle. As he rose, the contrast between him and Chloe was almost comical. He towered over her, not just in height but in presence. He didn't need to say who he was. His grace said it all. He turned to walk away, and as he did, a waiter from the back burst into the room, nearly tripping over a chair. "Wait! Wait! Chloe!" the waiter called out. It was Darren, the junior manager. His face was flushed, and he looked horrified. He jogged up to Big Shaq and practically bowed. "Mr. Shaquille, I am so sorry. There's been a huge misunderstanding. You're absolutely welcome here. This is your restaurant." The entire room gasped. Chloe's mouth fell open. Wait, your restaurant? Big Shaq gave a slow, humble nod. I just wanted to come in like anyone else. No announcements, no special treatment. Darren looked furious, but not at Shaq. He turned to Chloe. This is the owner of Maison Deluxe. The phones were now fully out. People were recording. Some were already uploading clips with captions like, "Waitress kicks out owner" and "Big Shaq owns the whole place." Chloe's face turned pale. She stammered, I didn't know. I'm so sorry, But Shaq raised a hand gently, stopping her. It's okay, he said. You judged based on what you saw. A lot of people do that. And with that, he turned back, sat down calmly at the booth he had chosen, and opened the menu. But this time, no one stopped him, not even the whispers. All eyes were on Chloe, and she knew her lesson had just been served. Just as Big Shaq turned to leave the VIP booth, his broad back casting a shadow over the candlelit floor, a sudden shout broke through the tension like a lightning bolt. Wait! Wait! The voice came from the rear hallway, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. All heads turned as Marcus, the restaurant's general manager, burst through the double doors, nearly knocking over a busboy. His face was red, from panic, not exertion, and his tie was slightly crooked as he weaved between tables, dodging diners with wide eyes and wild gestures. He finally reached the booth where Chloe stood frozen, and the tall man she had just dismissed was quietly preparing to walk away. "Mr. Shaq," Marcus gasped, half out of breath. "You're here early!" The room dropped into complete silence. Chloe's face froze like a statue. Her eyes darted between Marcus and the man she had just insulted. The color drained from her face as the pieces slowly clicked into place. "Mr. Shaq?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Her voice trembled. It wasn't just disbelief. It was fear. Marcus turned to her, exasperated and wide-eyed. "Chloe, are you serious? You didn't recognize him?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Marcus turned back toward the now seated man and addressed the room, his voice louder and filled with both apology and awe. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Shaquille Big Shaq Johnson." He looked around. "The man who bought this entire franchise last year. This is his restaurant." Gasps erupted from every direction. Some diners whispered, "Wait, the owner?" Others simply sat with mouths agape. One woman accidentally knocked over her wine glass and didn't even react. Phones were already up. The moment was being captured in real time. The same man Chloe had labeled as not a real guest, the one she accused of not belonging, was in fact the most important person in the building. Her mouth dropped open. Her throat tightened. She couldn't speak. Her mind raced. The outfit, the casual tone, no reservation. How could she have known? But that was exactly the problem. She hadn't asked. She hadn't wondered. She had judged, quickly, harshly, and publicly. Now she was standing before him, not just a man, but the owner, her employer, the person whose name was on her paycheck. Big Shaq didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He didn't make her grovel. He simply looked up at her, calm, composed, unshaken. "I wasn't expecting special treatment," he said, his voice firm yet calm. "Just respect." Those few words hit harder than anything Chloe had heard all year. No yelling, no threats, just truth. And it stung more than any insult. Around the room, heads nodded in quiet agreement. People murmured phrases like, "He's right," and "That was cold of her." Others simply watched, knowing they'd witnessed something powerful. Chloe's eyes welled up. Her pride, her certainty, everything she thought she knew about herself and her job, crumbled in that moment. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but nothing came out. Big Shaq turned to Marcus. "We'll talk in your office later, but for now, I'd like to enjoy my dinner, as a guest." Marcus nodded quickly, motioning for another waiter, this time a younger server named Emily, to take over service at the VIP table. Emily approached with grace and professionalism, placing a new menu in front of Mr. Shack. "Welcome, sir," she said softly, her hands steady. "We're honored to have you." He smiled gently. "Thank you." He opened the menu and began scanning it casually, as if nothing had happened. But Chloe knew everything had changed. She stepped back slowly, heart pounding in her chest, her apron suddenly feeling like a lead weight. She turned and walked away toward the kitchen, but her steps were heavy and unsure. In that moment, everyone in the restaurant had seen the same thing, not just a power reversal, but a life lesson, playing out in real time. Big Shack hadn't needed to prove his worth. He didn't have to show off. His presence, his calm, and his respectfulness had done all the talking, and in contrast, Chloe's actions had exposed everything she hadn't yet learned. What most people didn't know, what hardly anyone in that dining room could have guessed, was that Shaquille Big Shack Johnson didn't come from luxury, wealth, or fame. He grew up in a rough inner-city neighborhood where boarded-up windows and corner stores replaced cafes and parks. His mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. His father, when present, taught him the values of hard work and humility. Shaq learned early that the world judged people, not by who they were, but by how they looked, and often those judgments were dead wrong. He never forgot those lessons, even after he became successful, a millionaire through smart real estate deals, later diversifying into franchises, tech investments, and even philanthropy. Shaq stayed grounded. No diamond chains, no flashy suits, just a man who remembered where he came from. And that's why he had a habit, a very intentional one. Every so often, he'd walk into one of his restaurants dressed casually, without calling ahead, without bodyguards or assistants, not to test the food, not to inspect the kitchen, but to test the people. He wanted to see how they treated someone who didn't look like they belonged. Because if a staff member treated a stranger poorly, what would they do when no one was watching? This night, the night at Maison de Luxe, had been one of those quiet tests. But what happened shocked even him. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone, the dismissal, the way she didn't even ask his name. Chloe, a longtime employee, had seen him before, in brief meetings, in email updates, but clearly not enough to recognize him when he wasn't dressed for a press photo. He hadn't been looking for trouble, he just wanted dinner. But the confrontation had gone public, in front of guests, in front of staff. It wasn't just insulting. It was disappointing. And still he didn't explode. He didn't shout, didn't throw his weight around or declare, "Do you know who I am?" He just stood up, calm, quiet, patient, the same way he had always faced adversity. Now, seated once again in the VIP booth, his menu open in front of him, Shaq looked up at Marcus, the flustered, red-faced manager who had rushed to stop a disaster too late. "Let's talk in your office," Shaq said, closing the menu gently. "I have some decisions to make." Marcus nodded quickly, already nervous. "Of course. Right away, sir." Around the room, customers exchanged looks. It wasn't just the drama that caught their attention anymore. It was the dignity, the maturity. How many people, treated that way, would have stayed so composed? Chloe had slinked into the kitchen, too humiliated to face anyone. But her fate wasn't sealed. Not yet. Shaq wasn't cruel. He wasn't out for revenge. But he valued respect. And respect had to go both ways. As Shaq stood up and followed Marcus to the back office, the weight of the moment settled over the restaurant. Conversations resumed slowly, but quieter now. People weren't talking about food anymore. They were talking about the lesson they'd just witnessed. In the office, the walls were lined with wine racks and company awards. Marcus stood nervously by his desk as Shaq took a seat across from him. "I'm not here to fire people for mistakes," Shaq began, his tone firm but fair. "But that wasn't just a mistake. That was a mindset, one that reflects on me. And this brand." Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. She's been here for years, sir. She's usually sharp. But what happened out there, was way out of line. Shaq nodded slowly. Everyone has bad days. But what concerns me is that this wasn't a moment of stress. This was someone making a snap judgment and acting like they were above the customer. That's not what we're about. He paused, then added, I came in here like a regular person. And I was treated like I didn't matter. In my own place. What does that say to everyone else who walks in here not wearing a suit or designer shoes? Marcus couldn't answer. He knew Shaq was right. I don't care how rich someone looks, Shaq continued. I care how they're treated when no one's looking. That's the culture we build, or break, every day. He stood again. I want Chloe on suspension. Mandatory training, customer empathy. Maybe she can learn. If not, we'll find someone who gets it. Marcus nodded. Understood. As Shaq walked out of the office and back toward his table, the entire dining room subtly acknowledged him. Not because he was a celebrity, but because he had just demonstrated something a lot more powerful. Grace under fire. An hour had passed since the confrontation. The buzz had settled into murmurs. Some guests had finished their meals, others lingered, still whispering about the man in the maroon t-shirt who just revealed himself to be the owner. Meanwhile, Chloe stood at the bar, nervously polishing a row of wine glasses that were already spotless. Her hands shook slightly. She hadn't spoken to anyone since she left the floor. 1,000 thoughts ran through her head, most of them questions she didn't want the answers to. That's when Marcus returned. His walk was slow, deliberate, and serious. He wasn't angry, just firm. He stopped directly in front of her, and without a word handed her an envelope. Chloe looked at it like it might explode. She hesitated, then opened it carefully. Inside was a letter. Short. Director. A formal letter of termination. Her heart dropped. Wait. What? You're firing me? She asked, her voice cracking. Marcus looked her in the eyes. She continued, pleading now. But I didn't know who he was. I didn't know that was him. Marcus stayed calm, but his reply hit like a freight train. That's the point, Chloe. You treated him badly because you didn't know who he was, because of how he looked, and that's not the kind of service Mr. Shaq stands for. Not in this restaurant, not in this company, not in this world. She stood there, stunned, envelope shaking in her hand. There was no yelling, no dramatic scene, just the cold truth of her actions, laid bare in the quiet aftermath. Back in the dining room, Big Shaq had returned to his table. This time he was greeted not with suspicion, but with warmth and professionalism. His new server was a young woman named Janelle, a relatively new hire who hadn't yet met the owner. But unlike Chloe, she treated every customer like they mattered. No judgments, no attitude, just kindness and respect. She welcomed him with a smile, offered him the specials, and even recommended her personal favorite dessert. You've got good taste, Janelle, Shaq said with a smile. He enjoyed his meal without interruption. No whispers, no phones, just food and a feeling of dignity restored. When he was finished, he asked for the check. Janelle returned with it politely, but when she picked up the leather folder, she found a tip so generous it made her hands tremble. Tucked inside was a folded note that read, You treated me right, before you knew who I was. That matters. Shaq. Her eyes welled with tears, not from the money, but from the message. From the validation that decency mattered, that the way you treat people, even when you think no one's watching, always matters. But the story didn't end there. One of the diners from earlier, who had discreetly recorded the initial incident, uploaded the clip to social media with the caption, Waiter insults a guest for looking poor, then finds out he owns the restaurant. Within hours, the video went viral. Millions watched as Chloe barked at Big Shaq, dismissing him in front of a crowded dining room. And then, The moment of revelation when Marcus shouted, "That's the owner!" The internet lit up. Comments flooded in. He handled that with such class. I hope that waitress learns her lesson. This man is a role model. Real bosses move in silence. News outlets picked it up. Influencers reacted to it. Business leaders quoted him. It wasn't just about drama anymore. It had become a case study in character. One clip in particular, the moment Shaq said, "I wasn't expecting special treatment, just respect," became a trending soundbite stitched across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube shorts. Some called him the humble billionaire. Others dubbed it the realest owner test ever. And as for Chloe, she disappeared from the restaurant world for a while. Some said she changed careers. Others said she went back to school. But the lesson lingered. And it wasn't just for her. It was for anyone who's ever judged someone by their shoes, their clothes, or their accent. Shaq didn't just run a restaurant. He sent a message. Never judge someone by how they look. You never know who you're really talking to. That night, Big Shaq didn't just serve a meal. He served a masterclass in humility, leadership, and respect. If you found this story powerful, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps more people see it. And if you love stories with a twist and a message, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We've got more coming that you won't want to miss. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were in Big Shaq's shoes? Thanks for watching, and remember, treat everyone with respect. You never know who's sitting at your table.